Coming into number 10, we have this creepy angel skeleton. Also, it's alongside a really creepy hard-hitting message. Okay, I personally don't know what is creepier, this terrifying as F statue of basically a winged skeleton kissing the face of a stone corpse, or the inscription. The inscription reads, "The blood in his veins grows cold and all strength is gone. Faith has been extolled by his fall into the arms of death. Amen." I understand that for some people death isn't a jovial occasion, but can we maybe just chill out a little bit? This sobering statue can be found at Barcelona's Poblenou Cemetery, where I don't feel like I'm going to be taking a trip anytime soon. No thanks. Scary and really sad at number 9, we have this unidentified gravestone from Oskaloosa. This is in the Oskaloosa Pleasant View Cemetery in the United States. This stone reads, "Unidentified baby girl found in Delaware River, May 1977. That is so horrendously sad. The baby was never identified, and neither her parents or killer, if they were separate people, have ever been found either. Coming into number 8, this next tombstone is pretty much just a fancy way of saying you're next. It reads, "To the person passing by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon will be. Prepare yourself and pray for me." Wait. As I am now, you soon will be, but like, Oscar, you're dead. Oh, I see. This tombstone is pretty much just a direct threat telling you that, yeah, you're gonna die. Who even needs words when you could just let the whole horrifying stone itself do the talking? Am I right? Coming into number 6, we have a victim of the beast. If you visit the Salt Lake City Cemetery, you might not want to leave any flowers on Lily E. Grace's grave for fear of the repercussions. It seems like Lily, who died in November 1958, aged 77, was a victim of the beast, or so her gravestone says. They even added a 666 at the end of the inscription just to make it clear which beast she fell foul of. Weirdly, her husband is also buried at the same cemetery, but far away from his wife's corpse. The website WeirdUS.com claims a woman who walked on the grave later had an accident with her car door, which is spooky. I wanted to add something scary but like a little bit more fun at number 5. We have this descriptive cause of death. Back in the day, it was traditional to write a cause of death on a person's tombstone. Poor old George Spencer Millett, who lost his life by essentially being kissed to death, has this for a gravestone. That's right, George was just 15 when he fell foul of an ink eraser stabbing him to death. His tombstone basically does all of the talking and will tell you all about it. He was trying to escape birthday kisses from fellow office workers when he fell on the eraser ink. Weird. Obviously it is sad, but a deep dark part of me just loves this description on his gravestone. Another pretty frank and way less hilarious tombstone at number 4, we have pressed to death. Again, part of the descriptive tombstone category, it seems that Giles Corey was pressed to death, which is a really horrible way to go and makes reading his stone like really uncomfortable and claustrophobic. It turns out that he was actually murdered as part of the Salem witch trials, which makes his death even spookier. This gravestone can be found at the Charter Street Cemetery in Salem, Massachusetts. We have a murder victim's gravestone at number 3. I think like a murder victim's gravestone is always disconcerting. William Wood was murdered in Derbyshire, England in 1823. Not only that, he was actually pretty brutally murdered. The almost 200-year-old gravestone marks the spot where he was found dead and frankly tells the world that indeed he was murdered. He was here murdered, apparently. This is very chilling, and if you want to find it for yourself, it's between Disley and Whaley Bridge, but personally I wouldn't want to walk down there alone at night. Coming into number 2, putting the head into headstone, we have, I guess, this head in a stone. Ooh. Nothing sends a scarier tombstone message than a physical head in a box. The head belongs to the patron saint of venereal disease. Yes, there is a patron saint of venereal disease, which actually sends an even scarier message. The saint was Saint Vitalis of Assisi, who died in 1370. His name is on the case, but to be honest, I'm much less concerned with what is on the case than I am with what is in it. Finally, at number 1, we have an Ouija board headstone. So you know Ouija boards are used for contacting the dead, right? Well, what better place to do this than in a graveyard where, I mean, it's literally filled with dead people. Inventor of this spirit game, Elijah Bond, insisted on an Ouija board headstone for his own grave, which is very terrifying and very creepy. I mean, imagine playing with that thing, like, Absolutely no from me. Get me far away from that. Okay, coming in at number 10, we have the planes that they died in. Okay, this gives me the serious creeps. In a graveyard deep in the woods surrounding the Amari Air Base, you will find a pilot's graveyard where the bodies of Soviet-era airmen who died are buried with the tail fin of the planes that they crashed in. It's really sad, honestly. The tail of the plane that they crashed in is their tombstone. The effect of the fins is that the graveyard kind of looks like it's filled with ground sharks. It's truly haunting and very real when you realize that these are the actual wreckages and they're marking the graves of the dead. It becomes horrifyingly imaginable. Coming in at number 9, we have the Circle of Life. The Circle of Life is a beautiful thing. As we know from the first law of thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed, just transferred. When we die, the energy we had in our bodies is transferred into the soil. We're worm food. The worms are then of course eaten by birds and so on and so forth. It's the Circle of Life. While this is a lovely notion, the gravestone makes the Circle of Life sound rather literal and terrifying. Having passed in 1728 at the age of 42, what does JSD get on his gravestone? Oh, here lies Scott, left here to rot. Very literal. Coming in at number 8, we have The Mistake. Trial by mob is never ideal, especially when that trial gets you killed. It seems that George Johnson was murdered by locals who only realized the error of their ways when it was too late. The Boot Hill Cemetery in Arizona is famous for being the final resting place for a number of Wild West characters, including the McLaury brothers and Billy Clayton. But this point on this list is all about George. George bought a stolen horse without realizing that it was stolen. He was then sentenced to death despite him being totally innocent. His handmade 2-message reads, "Here lies George Johnson hanged by mistake in 1882. He was right, we were wrong, but we strung him up and now he's gone." Descriptive. Spooky. Scary or kind of funny, you decide. We have the beard at number 7. So I mean, persecution is never funny, like absolute hardline no to persecution. But persecuted for wearing a beard? With that information presented along with this lovely stone carving, I have to say I was strangely darkly amused, or I guess the right word is bemused. Poor Joseph Palmer loved his beard even though it was not in fashion in his lifetime in the early 1800s. It seems his local preacher even accused him of consorting with the devil because of his facial hair. In 1830, Palmer was attacked by a mob outside Fitchburg in Massachusetts. Why? Because he had a beard. They were armed with razors and scissors and they attempted to forcibly shave him. He ended up stabbing 2 of his attackers, lightly if there is such a thing as a light stabbing. He was then jailed and placed in solitary confinement for 15 months. Now his tombstone depicts him with his lovely beard and I'm really happy that he stood up for his facial hair to the very end. Long live the beard. Coming in at number 6, I'm not sure what to name this point other than the pie? What a horrible way to go. Not only did Sir Geoffrey Hudson get a piddly little grave plaque, it is also very descriptive in the creepiest of ways. It seems that Sir Geoffrey had dwarfism but still made it to the age of 63, which in the 1600s was great even for those born without a defect. How did Sir Geoffrey go though? Well, his grave says it all. A dwarf presented in a pie to King Charles I. What a way to go. To be fair, the grave doesn't actually make it clear if this is the way he died or if this was the way he was best known. Either way, it is pretty disconcerting. King Charles I, by the way, was said to be wicked and tyrannical. He was bareheaded, so he kind of got what was coming to him. His coffin's in St George's Chapel in Windsor, UK. Coming in at number 5, we have the explosion. I feel like the descriptive gravestones are absolutely the gnarliest. There are a lot of them on this list. Have a listen to the tale of poor Ellen Shannon. Her stone says that she died aged 26 after being fatally burned on the 21st of March 1870 by the explosion of a lamp filled with Ree Danforth's so-called non-explosive burning fluid. I do enjoy that the gravestone makes it clear the brand at fault and calls them out for their false advertising. This is like the sassy TripAdvisor or Twitter comment of the olden days. Although, to be totally fair, the poor woman did die, so it makes it pretty sad. If you want to see this spooky grave for yourself, it is in Girard Cemetery in Pennsylvania. Coming in at number 4, we have the Weeping Woman of Michigan. Okay, like first and foremost, this statue is terrifying from the off. A giant stone woman standing with her arms spread. I can certainly live without her. So this is a statue of the Virgin Mary who has been placed in Battle Creek's Oak Hill Cemetery. Legend has it that she cries real tears every Sunday night, and also apparently on Halloween and during a full moon. The under of her eyes are found to be wet on frequent occasions, despite there being no discernible reason. I guess no discernible reason other than she's a spooky statue, and why not? Maybe she's haunted, maybe she's just sad. What scary message is she trying to send? I'm not sure I want to know. Coming in at number 2, we have what they know. What happens after we die? Well, there isn't really anyone alive who can definitely answer that question. The only people that know are the billions of people who have died over the course of history, also including the owner of this gravestone. Simple yet effective, it reads, "Now I know something that you don't." Ooh, well, they very well just might, or they might not, depending on what actually happens. I like the mysticism though. If you were anywhere near as disgruntled as Mary C. Dolency, then you may have left some terse words on your gravestone to your neighbours too. Finally coming into number 1, we have the curse. Ooh dear, Mary was a bit of a crazy cat lady stereotype. She hated her neighbours, she would shine lights in their faces and start feuds, and yes, she had a lot of pets, although she did leave all of her money to the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Animal Cruelty. So actually, that really was pretty nice of her. Good on ya. But sadly, she did also leave something not so nice behind, a curse to her community. Hooray! On her tombstone is written, "May eternal damnation be upon those in Whalingport who without knowing me have maliciously vilified me. May the curse of God be upon them and theirs." I'm sorry, what? Do you want to chill out? May the curse of God be upon them. Ooh. It seems though that her tombstone is all talk. Locals say they don't believe they're cursed, which is good news. So guys, that was the top 10 scary tombstone messages part 3. I do have a little bonus one for you. Now I'm almost certain it's fake, but it made me laugh, so I wanted to share it with you. Check this out. It reads, "Died from not forwarding that text message to 10 people. Ah, they're the facts. Blink and you'll miss it, but if you look closely, you'll see that our number 10 was murdered by human wolves. 1. Any gravestone outlining murder freaks me out, and 2. What the actual F are human wolves? So I was thinking that maybe it was something along the lines of werewolves. Now this is something that it seems that the residents of Conemaugh, Oklahoma, where you can find the grave, think. In fact, the grave has been subject to many an urban legend. The official story of the gravestone of Catherine Cross is that she had an illegal abortion and died. Her devastated parents considered her body to have been torn to shreds by a bad doctor, or wolf. Another terrifying murder tombstone, we have the headstone of Princess Doe at number 9. The body of a teenager was found at Cedar Ridge Cemetery along Route 94 in New Jersey in 1982. The girl was thought to be between 14 and 18 years old, and her cause of death was blunt force trauma. While her face was not recognizable, it was clear that the girl came from a reasonably affluent background. Despite that, nobody in the area reported a teen as missing. Her gravestone is sad and scary in equal parts. It reads, "Princess Doe, missing from home, dead amongst strangers, remembered by all, born, ? Found July 15th, 1982. Now the stone is a living reminder that her killer, or indeed killers, are still out there. A spooky death rhyme makes these gravestones even spookier at number 8. This headstone reads, "It does my heart a world of good to see you in a box of wood," aka a coffin. Now the owner of their headstone wants you to die, and that, yeah, it freaks me out, I can't lie. That or the person who organised the grave is confessing to murder, which also isn't great. Chill out though guys, it turns out this headstone is just a Halloween decoration. I should have known because I did see the creepy cobwebs in the background and it was just too good to be true. Coming into number 7, we have Baby Monster. I feel like I could be a good baby monster. I feel like this image was in our thumbnail for part 1, but I didn't include it in the actual video, so let's talk about this somewhat terrifying and cryptic baby monster tombstone. It seems that this tiny devil lived for just over 3 months and somehow managed to garner a bit of a rep in its short time on Earth. In actuality, whilst this does seem like the final resting place of a wee beastie, it seems that actually the tombstone can be found at the Saar Pioneer Cemetery in Washington. The story is that the child's surname was actually Monster, which is a bit unfortunate. I don't know, I could get on board with being called Rebecca Monster actually, it might be better than Rebecca Felgate. I shall henceforth be known as Rebecca monster. This grave tells a horrible story at number 6. So here the tombstone reads, Eugene, found dead in 1929, buried 1964. So like, wait, if Eugene's body was found in 1929, what exactly was going on with it for 35 years? Well, sadly, Eugene was a black man found dead by the side of the road in Ohio at a time when black human rights were not equally considered or treated with much respect. It seems that poor Eugene was then embalmed and put on display at the Littleton Funeral Home, where he became somewhat of a tourist attraction. I mean, how sad is that? Eventually in the mid-60s, he was finally laid to rest. Now if anyone's gonna haunt their grave, I would imagine it would be Eugene. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, and this grave is giving off one pretty scary physical message at number 5. Yeah, so this is George's Rodenbach's grave. Sometimes people are dead and buried, but George's seems to be suggesting that he is otherwise. Just look at him, climbing out of his grave like the creep that he is. Imagine being alone in that graveyard at night and seeing old George's tombstone, like yikes. Stay dead, Georges, get back in there, your time is done. So with some of these tombstones we've done a little bit of digging to find out the story behind them, but no need with this absolute shocker at number 4, as basically the full story's laid out for us pretty damn clearly, and oh my god, it's terrifying. Wondering how Mary Jane McCoon died? Just consult her headstone for further detail. So, as it reads, she was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, was smothered with a feather bed. When her husband returned, she and her unborn child were dead and buried. Like, TMI gravestone, you could just say loving mother, happy wife. I feel like maybe they were just kind of frank in the 1850s. Also, poor rabid pregnant Mary was only 17 when she died by the looks of things, which is really sad. Up next at number 3 we have the sad headstone of Ironfoot Eva. It seems that Eva was a 300-pound giantess and sideshow performer. Her tombstone can be found at Old Trappers Lodge in California, and it's scary for 2 reasons. 1, the cold dead eyes of her statue, and 2, the fact that the inscription suggests that she was murdered. It reads, Ironfoot Eva, 1800 to 1830, 300-pound giantess, poetess, singer and blacksmith, killed on her wedding day by unknown riflemen. Well, there's that. Ooh, very very sad at number 2, we simply have Specimens. This tombstone sends a pretty distinct and horrifyingly clinical message. Found in a mental health hospital cemetery in Columbus, Ohio, there are actually a pair of gravestones marked as simply specimens. What remains and who they belong to, we don't know. I'd feel pretty creeped out if I saw these tombstones for myself. It's largely suspected that the so-called specimens are the mutilated remains of bodies used for dissection. Like, call them by their name. So finally, this is the scariest headstone that I have ever seen at number 1. Now a lot of these stones have told stories, but this one is enacting the murder scene. This just makes me so sad. We have Italino Lacamelli's gravestone. Italino was just a boy of 5 years old when he was murdered in 1925. He was happily in the garden playing with his hoop when he was murdered in broad daylight by a madman. His grave shows the moments before he dies, a happy boy with a hoop just doing his thing, but then he's chased by the scary hands of a killer coming to drag him into the underworld. Oh my god, like, I'm not okay.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Kate McCormick. This tombstone truly leaves one of the darkest and saddest stories I have ever heard. This stone reads, Kate McCormick, seduced and pregnant by her father's friend, unwed, she died from abortion, her only choice, abandoned in life and death by family. With but a single rose from her mother, buried only through the kindness of unknown benefactors. Died February 1876, age 21, victim of an unforgiving society. Have mercy on us. The story of what happened to Kate is obviously quite clear in the message and is truly an absolute nightmare. A trip to the cemetery is always a bit of a grim experience, but when you see something like this, it really does take it to a new level. All we can do is hope that wherever Kate is now, she is resting in peace and know that we haven't forgotten her or her story. In our number 9 spot today, we have Herman Harband. Herman decided to have a headstone made ahead of time before his death, but didn't even actually end up getting buried there, which is quite interesting. Herman had a message he wanted to get across, however, and he certainly did just that. It's actually a bit of a sad and terrifying story, and it really shows the place Herman was in when he made it. The stone reads, Herman Harband, born in 1918. My wife Eleanor Arthur of Queens, New York lived like a princess for 20 years, traveling the world with the best of everything. When I went blind, she tried to poison me, took all my money, all my medication, and left me in the dark alone and sick. It's a miracle I escaped. I won't see her in heaven because surely she's going to hell. Herman absolutely went off, but it definitely seems like he kind of had a right to, because that story is simply terrible. Good news is that Herman ended up getting remarried and he lived a happy and very long life until he passed away in 2011. In our number 8 spot today, we have Francis and Mary Huntrudes. This stone is one of the less sad ones on this list today, thankfully, and while still haunting, it's in more of a poetic or beautiful way. Or at least I think so. This tombstone is from Francis and Mary Huntrudes, and their stone tells the story of their lives and their love. It reads about how they were both born on the same day in 1600. They were married on their shared birthday, they had 12 children together, and then they both passed away on their birthdays just shortly after turning 80. That is quite some love story, and honestly, what are the chances? But the final 2 lines of the text on the tombstone really sum up the story so perfectly. They read, "Each tender heart so fit a match, surely could never be. Both in their lives and in their deaths agree." Maybe this match was simply a serendipitous coincidence, but I definitely would like to think otherwise. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Tazacorte Martyrs Memorial. This one is a little different from the others on this list today for a couple reasons. Firstly, these are tombstones for many individuals, and secondly, because there isn't a message left with them that I want to talk about, but instead just the entire eerie nature of the whole situation. This may appear as a gravesite that has been flooded, but it's actually an underwater memorial. In 1570, a group of Jesuit missionaries boarded a ship from Portugal to Brazil. A French pirate named Jacques Souris boarded the ship along with them, and from there, he and his men took the lives of all of the priests. Some of them even had their limbs cut off before they were thrown overboard. The lone survivor of this day was the ship's cook. The memorial features 40 crosses for each of the lives lost, and it is located near the area of the massacre, which is close to La Palma Island, 18 meters below the surface. I might be alone in this belief, but I think that there is just something extremely haunting about an underwater memorial. In our number 6 spot today, we have Jeremy Bibb Balasag. This tombstone goes hand in hand with an absolutely insane story about Jerry's life. The short of it is that Jerry, who is a professional wrestler, ended up vanishing after getting in trouble with the law. He was wanted for charges of fraud, and while no one knew his whereabouts for 6 months, when his mother picked up a magazine one day which featured the victims of the horrible cultist Jonestown massacre, she sadly saw her son's picture alongside all of the others. This led to there being a tombstone, of course, made for Jerry, although his body would have been already buried in California. So, this all happened in 1978, but let's flash forward to 1990. In that year, a man named Ricky A. Weta was arrested for attempting to take someone's life. He was fingerprinted upon his arrest, and who would have thought, Ricky turned out to be none other than the presumed dead Jerry. This whole story was, of course, huge national news because how could this have possibly happened? In the end, Jerry was caught and brought to justice. A few separate times, before he passed away in a prison in Nicaragua from a heart attack that was brought on by the heat in the prison, which is a whole separate issue we'll have to save for another video. In our number 5 spot today, we have Martha Jane Mary McCoon. Mary's tombstone tells the tale of her final days, and it truly feels like it is something out of a horror movie. Mary was born around 1838 and passed away most definitely not long enough after in 1855. She was pregnant at the time, and the writing on her tombstone really says it all, so I might as well just read it to you. Bitten by rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, was smothered with feather bed. Apparently at the time of being bit by this coyote, Mary's husband was out of town for work, and by the time he got back, his wife had already passed away and been buried, and he had absolutely no idea that any of this was happening, which is extremely tragic. It was so horrible that this was the way that Mary's life was taken, and it definitely makes you grateful for modern medicine, although rabies still manages to claim the lives of around 59,000 people per year. In our number 4 spot today, we have Mona Harold Vanny. This tombstone reads as a letter written to Mona from her children, but it certainly is not what you'd be expecting. Instead of the nice and lovely message you might think, Mona's 3 children detail what an absolute nightmare she was to them growing up. The stone reads, "To our mother. You spent your life expressing animosity for nearly every person you encountered, including your children. Within hours of his death, you even managed to declare your husband of 57 years an unsuited spouse or father. Hopefully you are now insulated from all of the dissatisfaction you found in human relationships. Wow, they really did not hold back one little bit. If it makes you feel better, the message that was left on their father's stone was much more kind and loving. I guess one thing is clear, and that is that Buddy, Jackie, and Mike were not messing around. In our number 3 spot today, we have Charles H. Salmon. Charles' tombstone tells the story of a medical malpractice that ended up leading to his death. Basically what happened is that Charles fell ill with a cold and was given medicine to help treat it. Little did he know, but he wasn't given the proper medicine, but was instead given morphine. When he went back to the doctor to explain that he wasn't getting any better, they also gave him morphine, and this caused him to end up overdosing on the drug. It truly is not quite clear how this could have possibly happened, and I'm not sure if Charles' family ever saw any form of justice for this terrible mistake, but it really is just such an awful story. In our number 2 spot today, we have Andrew J. Olsak. Andrew's tombstone is really straight to the point, but it is one of the saddest we have on today's list. His stone reads, "Abandoned in old age by wife and children. May God be more understanding and merciful." There really is a lot to unpack here. First, I have so many questions as to what happened and what led to this abandonment. Second, I have to know if this is his way of sticking it to his family who he claims abandoned him, or if this is more of just a simple goodbye. Either way, whatever the details are behind this story, coming upon this message in a graveyard would certainly make your heart sink a bit, and definitely be one of those things that you just remember. In our number 1 spot today, we have Leo Matlovich. Leo's tombstone is one that is certainly not easily forgotten. This stone doesn't even say his name, but the reason for that will become quite clear. First, we have to tell Leo's story. Leo was a war hero in the Air Force, and he challenged the policy of homosexuality in the military. Through Leo's bravery and activism, he was able to actually change a few things for gay people serving in the military, the effects of which can still be seen today. Despite Leo receiving both a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart for his service, in the end he was still discharged for being a gay man. He ended up passing away in San Francisco in 1988 after complications from HIV/AIDS. His tombstone reads, "A gay Vietnam veteran. While I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving one." There is nothing I could possibly say that would be more profound than that, so I'll just end off this point by saying Leo and all the things he did and fought for will truly never be forgotten. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Baby Monster. This is a stone that, although it has a short inscription, truly does speak for itself. This stone simply has the birth and death dates with the name Baby Monster. It is entirely possible that Monster was just the last name rather than a descriptor, but let's not forget that that still means they didn't ever have a name. But let's think about if Monster was not in fact the last name. Then really, what could have been going on here? A baby monster? During this time in the 1800s, monster could have been used as a descriptor for many different things that possibly didn't have names back then. Whatever the story really is behind this one, it certainly leaves you with quite an eerie feeling. In our number 9 spot today, we have Mary C. Delancey. Mary decided not to hold back on her tombstone at all and made her disdain for her neighbors very clear. May eternal damnation be upon those in Whaling Port who, without knowing me, maliciously vilified me. May the curse of God be upon them and theirs. The story behind this stone is actually apparently quite sad. It is said that Mary was actually quite paranoid that her neighborhood had conspired against her and wanted to harm her. It is also said that she wasn't the easiest to get along with because of this paranoia, and that she would often pick fights with those around her. At the end of her life in 1985, she left basically everything she had to the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Her tombstone is most definitely a very clear message, but when coupled with her story, it really puts things into perspective about what she may have been going through. In our number 8 spot today, we have Robert Clay Allison. If you were to just stumble upon Robert's tombstone while casually walking through a graveyard, his stone would certainly stick out based on what is written on it. Robert's stone explains that Robert never killed a man that didn't need killing. What? Just seeing this stone and reading that immediately fills me with a ton of questions. Who needs killing? Why was Robert the one who did all this? Was Robert okay? You get the point. Anyways, the good news is that Robert's story does give us some answers to these questions. As it turns out, Robert fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War, which is Interesting. After this, he became a cattle rancher and a gunfighter, and not surprisingly, he just fought anyone who ever challenged him. He even apparently broke into jail to enact some of his vigilante justice on some of the prisoners. He surprisingly did not pass away from a gunfight, however, and instead it was due to a wagon rolling over him, which is very gruesome. All in all, this tombstone is definitely eerie, but his story just might be worse. In our number 7 spot today, we have Lily E. Gray. Lily's grave is located in the Salt Lake City Cemetery, and other than what's on her stone, there isn't a lot else that is known about her or her life, which is very mysterious. While her obituary says that she passed away from natural causes, her gravestone calls her a victim of the beast, which is so scary. It is known that Lily married her husband at 72, and he was actually imprisoned at the time for his past criminal activity. So maybe that is why this creepy message remains, although that doesn't seem quite fair to either Lily or her husband, who was clearly paying for what he had done. The other theory is in relation to Aleister Crowley, who was an occultist. Aleister had many followers in the area, so some people speculate that this may have somehow tied into Lily's passing. I wish we had more answers about what really went on here and why this message was chosen for her stone. In our number 6 spot today, we have Giles Corey. Many of us have heard about the Salem witch trials at one point or another, and while there were 200 people accused of being witches or practicing witchcraft, around 20 of the accused actually ended up being executed, which is absolutely tragic and horrifying. Giles is one of the few people who wasn't hanged during the trials. Instead, those torturing him decided to try and get an admission from Giles. They wanted him to admit to practicing black magic and worshipping the devil. They ended up placing more and more rocks on his chest, adding a little bit of weight at a time. This ended up leading to him very sadly being crushed to death, and throughout the whole ordeal he never once confessed to something he didn't do, and instead just told them to add more weight. Giles' stone simply reads, Giles Corey, pressed to death, September 19th, 1692. R.I.P. Giles. In our number 5 spot today, we have Princess Doe. This is one of those stones that really tells a horribly sad tale. This stone reads, Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all, born, ? Found July 15th, 1982. While that really does say it all, let's dive a little bit further into the details so we can all remember Princess Doe together. On July 15th, 1982, the body of Princess Doe was found in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Warren County, New Jersey. It was clear that someone had taken her life and left her there, which is just the worst thing imaginable. Despite her young age, her being in good health, and her wearing nice clothing, not that that matters, Princess Doe has never been identified by anyone who was close to her or any family, and those who took her life have never been caught either. That is what ended up garnering her the name of Princess Doe. I truly hope one day some answers are found about what actually happened here so that she can get the peace and justice that she deserves. In our number 4 spot today, we have Catherine Cross. This stone is one that seems like it could be found on the set of a movie, but unfortunately it really is a real tombstone. This stone is another one that features a cause of death, but it is unlike any cause of death that I've ever seen, as it explains that Catherine was killed by human wolves. My first thought is werewolves? Was Catherine killed by werewolves? But as it turns out, she wasn't, and the story is quite grim. Catherine was actually receiving an abortion at the time of her death. Of course, in 1917, this was a highly illegal procedure that came with many risks, and unfortunately, this is what led to Catherine passing away. The doctor who was helping Catherine ended up being charged for performing a criminal operation that resulted in death, but in the end, the charges were dropped. The message left on her stone really gives a glimpse into what life was like back then in regards to something like this. In our number 3 spot today, we have Eugene. This is another John Doe story, but with a twist. In 1929, the body of an older man appeared on the side of the road in Ohio. No one was ever able to identify who the man was, no one knew where he came from, or really had anything to go on. The only possible clue he had on him was an address, but it just led to a vacant lot. The closest neighbor to the address was named Eugene, so they decided to call this unidentified man Eugene as well. So, this is where the twist comes in. Instead of burying him, they decided to keep Eugene on display as a roadside attraction. I truly wish I was making that up, because first of all, Eugene deserves better than that, but also, who wants to see a dead body as a tourist attraction? For 35 years, Eugene was put on display until he was finally laid to rest. This is what led to his tombstone to read, Eugene, found dead in 1929, buried in 1964. In our number 2 spot today, we have Specimens. This gravestone is located in the Ohio Asylum for the Insane Cemetery, which already gives a creepy feeling, but this tombstone message, or lack thereof, is really haunting. This stone only has one word, and that is specimens. There's nothing else. No date, nothing to insinuate what that means. Is it a last name? I'm only left with a lot of questions and basically no answers. We've heard a lot of crazy and sad stories on this list today, so I really am hoping that there isn't one that goes along with this. If anyone knows why they would do this, please let me know in the comments down below, because this really is just a creepy mystery. In our number 1 spot today, we have mortality. To end off our list today, we are looking at a stone that I'm not sure who it belongs to or what their story is, but instead it just features a simple, eerie message that truthfully is always good to remember. The stone reads, "Reader, beware as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Therefore, prepare to follow me." This is definitely one of those ones that can send you spiraling into a full existential crisis, but it is also just a great reminder to live life to the fullest and to not take things for granted. After all, life is only short and temporary. But to be fair, if I was walking through a cemetery and just stumbled upon this message, I'd be a little freaked out, like someone was trying to send me a sign or something.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Giles Corey. Out of the 27 people who had their lives taken away from them during the 1692 Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged, 7 passed away in prison while serving their sentence, and the last victim was Giles Corey. He refused to plead either innocent or guilty, and the law at the time states you can't be tried otherwise. So what they did next was unimaginable. As his tombstone hints towards, Giles Corey was pressed to death. The townsfolk laid a heavy board on top of the 81-year-old man, and then over the course of 2 days, boulders were slowly added, making the weight more and more unbearable. They were hoping that Giles would admit something, either innocent or guilty, but every time they asked him anything, Giles responded with, "More weight." Yeah, how epic is that? Extremely brave. But sadly, after 2 days of this torture, Giles Corey passed away. He fought for so long and did what he did because if he had gone either of the other 2 ways, Giles would have had his property taken away by the town. But since he passed away, not admitting guilt, he was still in full possession of his estate, which immediately went to his son-in-law. Yeah, Salem witch trials. Not the craziest thing that was happening on this list, to be honest with you. Salem witch trials were, yeah, horrible. Pretty horrible thing to look back on right off the bat. Number 9, Ellen Shannon. Heading over to the late 1800s for this one, and I gotta warn you, this one is pretty dark. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today, like at all. For example, if you wanted to read before bed, you didn't have a Kindle back in the day, you didn't have an iPad, you didn't even have a nightlight, but you did have a kerosene lamp. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say it, the obvious happened. Her tomb in Pennsylvania reads in memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years, who was fatally burned March 21, 1870 by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid. Yes, that's what it actually says. And it's a tragedy. That's a horrible way to go out, don't get me wrong. But I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth publicly as the cause of death here. She put him on blast. Number 8, victim of the beast. Lily E. Gray was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery back in 1958. This one is quite recent as far as tombstones go. This one is the most common looking as well. It's not monumental. I'm sure many have missed it in time. The message written on the stone back in 1958 says, Lily E. Gray, June 6, 1881 to November 14, 1958. Victim of the beast, 666. Now see, if that 666 wasn't there, I would be like, oh, maybe she was attacked by an animal, maybe like the beast was a natural phenomenon, like, you know, a surfing term for a large wave, or like a risky mountain trail, something like that. The 666 makes it quite specific on who they're referring to here, so that's pretty haunting. The beast sounds like something sinister, something from the underworld. In the book of Revelation, the beast is literally the Antichrist. Not sure what happened here, but the area was also known to have followers of Aleister Crowley. Crowley also referred to himself as the Beast 666. It sounds like an old Hotmail when you add numbers, doesn't it? The Beast 666. Add me. Number 7, the Ouija board. The fact that you can just buy a Ouija board from a Toys R Us now is hilarious to me. That's so creepy. They have glow-in-the-dark Ouija boards. Yeah, just in case the lights go out and you still want to communicate with the dead. And, you know, glow in the dark is fun. It's like people want to get possessed nowadays, right? Where did all this Ouija board madness start? Well, it began with Elijah Bond. Bond was the first person to ever patent the Ouija board, which is a scary feat in itself. A lot of questions already. But when he was buried, he was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. Now that was back in 1921, mind you, and it wasn't until 2007 until his resting place got an upgrade. A man named Robert Merck found his spot, raised money to get him a tombstone, and of course, it had to be a Ouija board. Yeah, if you have any words you want to say, any fan questions, bring your own easel, go ask away. Number 6, specimens. Specimens, yeah, not very large either. This one is a very small tombstone. This one is found in a cemetery near an Ohio asylum. There's actually 2 of these headstones. Both of them say specimens. Again, specimens, just that's it. The fact that these stones are the size of a shoebox also makes it even more chilling. This psychiatric facility was the first state-supported asylum in the US. Its history was dark in the early experimental treatment days, so perhaps these headstones could be body parts. You knew I was gonna say that. It's bad. It's all bad. The list gets worse, dare I say. Only halfway. Number 5, Midnight Mary. Mary E. Hart, more commonly referred to as Midnight Mary, had to be featured on this list. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary was supposedly buried alive. Yeah, accidentally. It wasn't anything horrible, although this is a pretty dark thing. It wasn't worse. Her stone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, "At high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work, in her full strength and body and mind, Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then right underneath, there's one line that reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." Again, you had us in the first half. The back 9 gets a little scary. Now, many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, but tales of her being buried alive suggest that there might be a midnight curse hanging about this area. So if you live in this area, you now have a curfew. There you go. You have a curfew now. Go home. Number 4, Mary Jane McCune. Some of the details in this one I can't even talk about here on the tube of you. It's really dark, really, really dark. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farrar. She was born in 1838 and passed away later in 1855. Quite young. Now, with many of these tombstones, they can be pretty sparse with details, like specimens, for example. Or you can explain as much as you can in that one block, spread awareness to the public. Like, you know, any lamp mishaps. Both can be haunting to read. Underneath Mary Jane's name and dates is a message on how she passed away. Mary Jane was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was smothered with feather bed. Wild. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time and found out what happened only when he got back. That is so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because, well, that was it. That was your legacy. Literally written in stone. It's like so many characters or less to explain how you died horribly. Number 3, Eugene. Humans are odd, okay? Before we get into these last few, the ancient tombstone curses, you know, first we have to look back to 1929 and how not to preserve a mummy. Yeah, let's do it. 1929, Ohio, a corpse just appeared on the road, out of nowhere. We love those. There was even an address found on this man's body, but it was an empty plot of land once they followed through. They had no name for this body, so they named him Eugene. Yeah, they named him after a local neighbor. Yeah, hey, we're gonna name this dead guy after you. Is that cool, Eugene? No? Well, too late. They used this body as an attraction. They gave it the mummy treatment, which in Ohio 1929 probably wasn't the best way, but they did it. And then 25 years later, you know, when more and more people started asking about this Ohio mummy, they laid the man to rest. Finally, they officially buried him in 1964. So now when you see this grave, it says, Eugene, found dead in 1929, buried 1964. I bet so many people are confused if they saw this. Send them this video and then type, "You won't believe number 3." They're like, what, do you work for MA? What is this guy doing? Why did he tell me to press the thumbs up? Who is this? Number 2, ancient tomb curse. Ancient Egyptian tombs are beautiful. Even after this many years, they're well preserved. Ancient Egyptians believed that false doors were a connection to the dead, and that's how spirits were able to travel here and there. Most false doors can be found in the west wall because Egyptians believed that the west was the land of the dead. The walls of ancient Egyptian tombs are also full of jewelry, art, clothing, basically anything valuable you may need in the afterlife to impress the gods. You're offering up your finest treasures, but with that comes a warning from these gods. One warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose if you were to steal anything that wasn't yours in these tombs. Inside the found tomb of Ankh-Mahor, for example, who was a pharaoh official 4,000 years ago, inside their tomb a curse was left over. He was buried in Mastaba in an above ground massive tomb, and left on the wall was this warning: "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And then it continues to warn trespassers of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders others with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, I think that ought to do the trick. Yeah, no way I'm messing with an ancient magician pharaoh. I'm good. I'm definitely all good. And finally, number 1, KB55. Yeah, we'll end this list on an ancient Egyptian tomb with perhaps the most chilling message left over of all time. This tomb was found, of course, in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ireton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. This was a big deal. But the reason we refer to this tomb by a number rather than a name is because, well, we still have no idea who it was made for. Even the walls of the tomb inside, they aren't covered with any hieroglyphs, no artwork, no fake doors. There isn't any clothing laying around, there's no jewelry, it's just bare, which is extremely odd given what I just told you. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KB55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance, markings that show that the entrance was widened since it was first cut, along with the ceiling being raised higher. So adjustments were made at some point, meaning this was not a forgotten project by any means, which makes it creepier. The only hint as to who or what is buried remains on the wall, and it's one hieroglyph. That hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Yeah, I sure hope not. I've seen The Mummy, and I really hope not. I'm all set. Cheers on that one. Number 10, cursed tablets. Exploring ancient ruins is fun until, you find a few cursed tablets. Those kill the mood for sure. Hate those. Back in 2020, around 30 lead tablets were found in Keramarikos, Greece. This was once Athens' main burial ground thousands of years ago, so this is a pretty sweet find. They found the tablets at the bottom of a 2,500-year-old well. But once they began translating the tablets, yeah, it makes a bit more sense why they found them in a well. They were cursed, definitely cursed. All of these tablets invoke the gods of the underworld. They implore the gods to cause harm to others. Yeah, imagine this is your first excursion and you find 30 cursed tablets. I'd be like, okay, well, guess I'm quitting. Guess this is my 2-week notice already. Dr. Jutta Storzek, director of the excavation, says they know that these tablets were to curse somebody, but whomever ordered the curse is still nameless. It's almost as if digging up ancient graves is a bad idea. I don't know, hence why we're on to part 2. Let's move on. Number 9, John Rennie. This next one here, honestly, it's not a bad idea at all. Back in 1832, a Welsh house painter named John Rennie passed away. His grave is quite unique. There's an inscription on his gravestone that's a grid, a big, massive, like a mathematical grid almost. It's 19 squares across and 15 high. In all of these spaces, there's letters that all make up the line, "Here lies John Rennie." For years, citizens thought that it was interesting, just a bit of fun to be remembered by, and if that was the case, clearly it worked. Now, thousands of us are looking like, oh, John Rennie, nice, cool idea. Others have a different idea. Some speculate John was trying to trick the devil in order to protect his soul after he passed. That's a bit different than a crossword puzzle, okay? I don't know, maybe the guy just liked Wordles. Why does it always have to be something so dark? Why is it always curses? Why is he always trying to juke out the devil? I'll do the same thing for my tombstone, but once you decode mine, it just says, smash that thumbs up. They're like, what? What does that mean? Number 8, remember death. Ah yes, can't forget about that. Death and Metaxas, can't forget. Turning the calendars back to 1794, a man named James Leeson was 38 at the time of his passing, which for the time is actually not bad at all. His grave is in New York and it's one of the most visited of all times. There aren't any crossword puzzles or anything like that, just a few symbols. So a little bit lighter. That's all there is on an otherwise standard headstone. There's an hourglass with wings, a flaming urn, and a stonecutter's tool, of course suggesting he was once a mason. There's one line at the top that was decoded a century later. In 1889, somebody figured this message out that appeared to be a Masonic cipher somehow connected to tic-tac-toe. Yeah, odd. The message decoded was, remember death. Yeah, we're not forgetting anytime soon, my guy. So now that we know this, those symbols become a bit more eerie. Hourglass with wings, that symbolizes time passing quickly. The flaming urn represents a soul's immortality. Lovely, lovely stuff. I'm just gonna have that cool S that we always used to draw in elementary school. Number 7, Paris catacombs. Ah yes, of course we have to include some catacomb creepiness in a part 2. These catacombs date back to the late 1700s, okay? When the city's cemeteries were piling up. And I mean that in a literal sense. So officials began moving contents from all over the city. They moved them all around the city to these abandoned mines. The catacombs were then opened in 1809. What a fun family excursion that must have been. Awesome. Bring nose plugs for the fam. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on death. Yeah, I'm sure everybody who visits thinks of nothing else. I'm pretty sure we nailed it there with the wall of skulls. That ought to do it. In order to ensure this was the vibe of the room, there's also a phrase carved above the entrance. It translates to, stop, this is the empire of the dead. Cool, say no more, you got it, I'm on my way. There's also another message right underneath and it says stop in the name of love. And you're like, oh, that's a bit nicer. No, I'm just kidding. The second one was a lie. Number 6, a strange warning. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves does not mean that these messages have to be written or drawn out. Sometimes it can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. That's a message. That ought to speak for itself, I'd say, no? You see that, I'm like, oh, see ya, on my way. This is your cave, no problem. I'll find the next one over. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground. And judging from the skull, it had clearly been hunted down by humans. That's not the mysterious part. The mysterious part is that all of the bones were carefully separated, and there's no marks to suggest that any of these tools were used. So researchers believe this donkey wasn't even used for food. The limbs were placed to point north and south. They used a donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Of all the ways to go out. What if he wanted to point east or west, you know? Give this guy a choice. What if he's not a fan of the north or south? Donkeys in that area of Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre by any means, but the way that the bones were buried, that's very odd. That's an odd message right there. Besides north and south, literally pointing, that is. We'll never know. Number 5, mythical carvings. Back in 2014, a 1700-year-old cemetery was discovered along the Silk Road, which are these ancient trade routes, ancient highways rather, connecting China and the Roman Empire. In the city of Kucha, which is now northwest China, this cemetery was found along with 10 ancient tombs, one of which was referred to as M3. M3 didn't have any haunting messages per se, but it did contain several carvings of mythical creatures. There's the white tiger of the west, the black turtle of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, so far so lovely, and then there's the azure dragon of the east. So a little scarier on the back 9 there. That dragon part was a bit jarring. These mythical carvings represent different seasons and the heavens, but what could the other 6 carvings mean? Perhaps depictions of hell? Who's to say? Number 4, the ring of Sekanianis. One ring to rule them all. And by rule, of course, I mean curse you and your entire family. This is why you don't steal from ancient tombs. Right here, listen up. This 12-gram gold ring, for starters, is massive. Its diameter is 25 millimeters, so unless you're wearing some sort of gauntlet, this ring is definitely gonna fall off your finger. Or you're Dave Bautista, then that would probably fit, I don't know. The ring had first been found in 1785. A farmer was plowing a field in Silchester Village, a village west of London known for its grim history. In 45 AD, ancient Romans invaded that same site, and come the 17th century, it was completely abandoned. The ring was mighty and even held an inscription, a Latin inscription, of course, and it read, Senequion vivas indium. What does that mean? Well, we'll come back to it. When 1929 rolled around, new details surfaced, or resurfaced rather. The data from the ring matched an excavation that was done in the early 1900s, less than 100 miles away. A place called Lydney, that's where this ring is from. At the same site, a tablet was found recalling the Celtic god of healing and hunting, and how his favorite ring got stolen. Yep, there it is, someone's pissed. That's the god right now. He hears me talking about the ring and he's like, give it back. In case you're wondering why this rings a bell, Lord of the Rings was inspired by this legend. The tablet also says, may he who wears the name of Sekanianis not have health until he brings the ring back to the Temple of Nodens. Yeah, let's get that ring back ASAP, please. I would be a lot quicker than Lord of the Rings. Where's this temple? I'm gonna put it in my Uber right now. Number 3, Robert Clay Allison. Sometimes you decipher a message on a tomb and it's peaceful, it's embracing the afterlife, especially ancient Egyptian tombs. The paintings you'll find, they're jaw-dropping. They're gorgeous. And then there's a tomb from the wild, wild west. It's not the same. It's not as much love in this tomb. For example, Robert Clay Allison. This man lived from 1840 to 1887. He was known as a rancher and of course, he loved to duel. On his tombstone, it reads, Robert Clay Allison. He never killed a man that did not need killing. That's so Western. That is the most Wild West tombstone ever. The first time I read that in Sam Elliott's voice. This guy, he loved to duel. I can't even do it, my voice can't go that deep. He loved to duel, I guess, I don't know. But he ended up dying from bad luck. Yeah, a wagon ended up rolling over his head in 1887 when he was 46 years old. What a way to go. The guy also didn't get a headstone for 90 years. And after 90 years, that's the best way they could sum up his entire life. Never killed a man who didn't need killing. Okay. Number 2, message from Egyptian afterlife. We're all curious about what happens after you die, but nobody celebrates the end of life like ancient Egyptians. Like I mentioned earlier, they would paint doors, leave valuables. Any new tomb we discover provides more hints as to what lies beyond. An ancient necropolis was discovered a few years ago in Egypt, and it contains dozens of coffins and a necklace that holds a message from the afterlife. This site is around 2,000 years old, and they're in the process of excavating it as we speak. But so far, the tombs and artifacts found belong to an ancient priestess. A message from the afterlife is pretty spectacular. Just, you know, don't let Rose from the Titanic near the necklace, or else she'll toss it overboard. That was everybody during Titanic. No. Why would she do that? And finally, number 1. Terracotta Army. We're covering all the tombs this week, so of course in a part 2 we have to finish with the Terracotta Army. This is a massive, massive haunting tomb. The tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. In this tomb we can find 8,000 statues, but they all have unique carvings on their faces, as if to suggest these are custom statues. All 8,000 of them. The emperor believed that after he had passed on, he would still have to face the spirits of all of his enemies. So he wanted to be prepared even after death. However, the emperor decided to close the tomb forever before the workers even had a chance to get out. He was worried his enemies had found out, so there's now lots of statues and dark history in this one. The dark message here is that the emperor felt like he needed another army for whatever lies after death. That in itself is pretty haunting. Why did he believe that? Why was so much work gone into something for after the fact? Now I'm scared about death. That's great. Look what you guys have done to me. Number 10, the Red Lady. Weird start. Back in 2015, archaeologists uncovered a 19,000-year-old Paleolithic burial site. This is huge. This was the first ever found on the Iberian Peninsula in northern Spain. It was a big deal. They described the findings as the Red Lady of El Muron. Sounds like something from Game of Thrones. There's remains of a woman who we think was around 35 to 40 years old at the time of her passing, and her remains are beside this block covered in red ochre, and remnants of flowers were also found, along with stone artifacts and animal bones. So something was happening. In 2015, archaeologists believe they found her tombstone as well, and it's a limestone block with engravings that make the letter V almost. Now this was a time where cave burials, let alone elaborate burials in general, were extremely rare. She also wasn't tucked away in the corner or anything like that. She was in the middle of this cave where many people lived day to day. Why she had a burial like this, why the carved V was there, what the red ochre surrounding her tomb means, well, we've been trying to figure that out for 19 years. Any guesses? Sound off below. We have no idea. Number 9. 2013 engraving scandal. Look, I love to joke about history, especially dark history, but given the chance, I would be extremely respectful around these ancient sites, or like ancient tombs, right? The Luxor Temple in Egypt, for example. It's one of the most cherished places on earth. It's ancient history at its finest. Back in 2013, a young boy named Ding Zhaho scratched his name onto a 3,500-year-old piece of Egyptian artwork. Yeah, he wrote Ding Zhaho was here in Mandarin. Look, I'm not shaming the dude, but if you're gonna do a blank was here, do it in your locker. Do it under your desk. Anything is better than ancient artwork. That's wild. I genuinely feel bad for him. He didn't know better really at the time. His parents apologized publicly, and his school website was even hacked. Yeah, somebody mocked him and the vandalism on the school website. So, I mean, yeah, it's a bad idea, but we don't need to Game of Thrones shame the kid, you know what I mean? I'm sure he learned his lesson right from the start. According to the Egyptian Protection of Cultural Relics law, if you engrave, write, smudge anything at a heritage site, you could face jail time. Yeah, 3 months to a year. Yeah, all that for Taylor was here. I'm like, what? I had no idea, really? Number 8. Ancient entanglement. We look back to the ancient ruins of Pompeii for this one. It was once a thriving, beautiful city in ancient Rome, and Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 CE. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the ancient city in volcanic ash. Excavation, of course, didn't begin until the 18th century, and then after a full century of careful work, the city was then reopened to the public once again. Now we're uncovering ancient restaurants and finding old graffiti. Pompeii in itself is an ancient burial site. Residents left messages on walls of buildings. There's tributes to lost loved ones all over the city. There's one exchange written on a wall about two men named Successes and Severus. Here's the message. Here we go. Successes. A weaver loves the innkeeper's girl named Iris. She, however, does not love him. Still, he begs her to have pity on him. His rival Severus wrote back. He wrote, "Goodbye, envious one. Why do you get in the way? Submit to a handsomer man, and one who is being treated very wrongly and good looking have spoken. I have written all there is to say. You love Iris, but she does not love you." Yeah, it didn't really make a lot of sense. They tried their best. And then a volcano went off, and then nobody settled their beef. See, this is why you don't waste time in love triangles, guys, or entanglements, okay? This is for you. Just let her go, okay? Let her go, dude. Mount Vesuvius could go off any day, and then what? You were too worried about Successes your whole life. No more entanglements, okay? That was so 79 CE. Let's move on. Number 7, handcuffs. Okay, we've gotten pretty dark for the last 2 parts, so we'll jazz it up a bit for our midpoint here almost. At number 7, he says, this comes from an anonymous source online. They joined their friend one shift while they were working at a cemetery. Yeah, see, normally you visit friends if they work at bars or movie theaters or, you know, fun places, but cemeteries, I guess that's a good plug to have too, sure. They were both walking around patrolling the cemetery, pretty peaceful gig, all things considered, but all of a sudden they saw something left behind sitting on a tombstone. Yeah, dangling off a statue on the grave were pink, fluffy handcuffs. Just waiting. They laughed at the finding. I mean, of course, to each their own, you're not gonna judge. But to this day, they've never figured out just why somebody would leave handcuffs. They don't know who left them or anything about it. To be fair, they didn't ask a lot of questions afterwards. They were going around town asking about the handcuffs. Out of all the memorabilia, we're gonna go with pink handcuffs also to leave behind, really. They're pink, flowers are pink, it's festive, so yeah, maybe it's a nice one. We'll count that as a nice one. Number 6. Book of the Dead, chapter 17. And immediately back to dark stuff. Here we go. Just over a year ago, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced the discovery of Queen Neri, the wife of King Teti, aka the first pharaoh of Egypt's 6th dynasty. They found her burial shaft. There were coffins, mummies, artifacts, all that good stuff, dating back to the New Kingdom, meaning the Saqqara necropolis was used in the late period. But now, apparently, it was also used in the New Kingdom as well. That's news to us. That's huge. Perhaps the most questionable find, like I mentioned earlier, was a 4-meter long scroll. That was the 17th chapter of the Book of the Dead. My personal favorite chapter. That's a good one. Nice big character arc in that one. Funerary masks were also found, as well as miniature boats and 50 coffins. Again, this is the first time 3,000-year-old coffins were found in the Saqqara necropolis, so there's a lot of unknown in this one. Number 5. King Tut's Curse. The new Grand Egyptian Museum opened officially in 2021. And while that's quite recent, the contents displayed inside definitely are not. For the first time in history, King Tut's ancient belongings, the artifacts discovered with him, they will all be on display. Every single one of them. Prior to this museum being opened, we only saw 150 artifacts from his tomb. They took all these pieces on tour and whatnot, but now this museum will house thousands of artifacts. The final resting place for King Tut's collection. Sounds pretty dandy, right? That's over 7,000 square meters. What a display. But not all these belongings bring good feelings, apparently. Many believe we're putting King Tut's curse on full display at the same time, and those who attend the museum will be cursed forever. Yeah, personally, that's a pass for me. Walking through an ancient burial site, I don't know, I've seen Moon Knight. I'm not getting cursed today, my friends. No thank you. Number 4, the animal tombs. In part 2, I mentioned donkey remains found in St. Augustine, remains that were left behind in an odd way, you could say that. This tomb was found in the Valley of the Kings. This one makes the donkey look much more tame of an event. For starters, this animal tomb was referred to by a number rather than a name. That's a big ancient Egyptian red flag. In 1906, Edward Ayrton discovered tomb KB50, KB51, and KB52, now collectively known as the animal tombs. Sounds a little cooler as well. When officials opened KB52, it was completely empty. That's not a good sign when finding tombs. It was empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a chest that had 4 compartments and again, completely empty. So what happened here? Where everything went, we have no clue. At that point, you just turn around and not ask any questions. Yeah, I find an animal tomb? Buddy, see you later. Number 3, unmarked grave. This next one comes from an anonymous paranormal investigator. They didn't work at a cemetery, but they would often do walkthroughs. I'm all for hobbies, but leave families alone maybe. I don't know, just an idea. Nobody wants a guy with a squeaky radio near their family's gravesite, I bet. One grave caught this paranormal investigator's attention. There were trinkets, glass beads, and small figurines almost. Things that didn't really look like toys but kinda did. The most peculiar were a few tennis balls. What would be pretty jarring to see in the middle of a visit, a pile of tennis balls, they later learned that the first body to be buried in these ancient cemeteries were often dogs. A guard dog, yeah, to watch the human souls when they started to fill up said cemetery. Yeah, walking by a grave with bones and balls, don't be thrown off. Perhaps it was just an ancient good boy. Yeah, rest in peace, little dude. I'll bring a tennis ball next time. Number 2. Jeep tires. Heading over to Barrie, Ontario for this next one. Yeah, so close to home, but why? How could we possibly be talking about this, Taylor? All right, let me paint this picture for you first, okay, here we go. You bury your loved one in Barrie, Ontario. It's a cold winter's night. It's February 2021. Caledon OPP gets a call that some dude is driving a Jeep around the cemetery. Yeah, the guy's just doing burnouts, just testing the capabilities of his 4-wheel drive. Yeah, so you thought the Egyptian art was bad? Somehow even worse is going on in Barrie, Ontario. No gravestones were damaged, don't worry, nothing like that happened. But now we gotta wait 2 springs until these Jeep tire marks disappear. This is so stupid. A 32-year-old Brampton man was behind the wheel for this one. figuratively and literally. Wasn't out to deface property or anything like that. He just wanted to go muddin', just wanted to go take her for a rip, you know, grab some Timmies, go give her a rip, classic. What's Ontario's slogan again? Yours to discover. Nice. No wonder the gravestones weren't damaged also. It was a Jeep. The thing probably just bounced off them. It was like going. The thing got stuck almost immediately also. The guy didn't get away with any of this. It was a complete waste of time. And number 1, unknown caller. Sometimes these messages from beyond the grave aren't in writing. Sometimes there's more that needs to be said. So I just had to include this story from user Summerfield85. I figured it's a good way to end this part 3. I've heard some creepy tales in my lifetime about people who have passed away, but this one, I'm not sure I want to believe it. I don't know, it's kind of eerie. A day after this user's mother passed away, they got a phone call from an unknown number. This was a time where caller ID simply just didn't exist, by the way. You couldn't just answer and be like, oh, it's so-and-so, bye. Things were a little harder to track down. Could have been a prank, yeah, but would somebody ever do this? I certainly hope not. The next day after their mother passed, they received a call. And when they picked it up, it sounded like their mother was on the other end saying, Lolo, question mark? And then they said, Mom? And then the caller hung up and never called again. They recall the voice and how it was exactly like their late mother's voice and how Lo was a nickname she used to call her. The only person to ever call her that nickname as well. She had the same accent and everything. In the following weeks, items related to her mother began to flew across the room as well, which just reinforces this initial haunting call. Oh God. The amount of unknown calls I've ignored on purpose. Ooh. Sorry, Mom. Kicking off our list at number 10, Ancient Curse. We'll kick this list off in ancient Egypt, then we'll work our way up to more modern stuff. You know how it is. When officials found the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, a pharaoh official that lived 4,000 years ago, they also found a warning. A message, a curse rather. It was written right there on the wall. That's how you know that you're f***ed. Buried in a mastaba, an above ground massive tomb, held this warning. It reads, might do against this my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. Yeah, you mess with my stuff, I'll haunt you and your family. How does that sound? Deal? Alright, deal. It also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, this pharaoh official wasn't f***ing around, that's for sure. Number 9, remember death. Yes, can't forget. Turning the calendars a bit forward now to 1794 AD. A man named James Leeson was 38 at the time of his passing. Now his grave is in New York, and it's one of the most visited graves ever. The message left over on his tombstone is quite simple. It's just a few symbols. Some Harry Potter stuff going on. That's all it takes on an otherwise standard headstone. There's an hourglass with wings, a flaming urn, and a stonecutter's tool, suggesting that this person may have been a mason. There's one line at the top that was decoded a century later. In 1889, somebody finally figured out another message, and this message said, remember death. So now that we know this, those symbols become a bit more eerie. An hourglass with wings, that symbolizes time passing quickly, and the flaming urn represents a soul's immortality. Nice. How lovely. Again, on my headstone, it'll say like and or subscribe. Number 8, Ellen Shannon. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today. Wemyss wasn't born yet. We didn't have anything, right? No safety hats, nothing like that. For example, if you wanted to read a little novel before bed, you didn't have a kind Kindle with you. You didn't even have a nightlight for that matter. But you did have a kerosene lamp. How lucky are you? That's horrible. That's pretty much all you had back then. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say, the obvious happened. You know the title of this list. Pretty grim. Her tombstone in Pennsylvania doesn't shy away from the cause of her untimely death. See, in a time before Twitter, this was the best way to spread awareness on otherwise a horrible product. Ellen Shannon's tombstone reads, in memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years old, who was fatally burned on the 21st of March 1870 by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid. Yeah, that's a tragedy, of course, and that's a horrible way to go out, but I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth himself publicly as the cause of her death. They put him on blast, for lack of a better term. Number 7, Midnight Mary. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary E. Hart, aka Midnight Mary, was placed in a casket and buried, thought to be dead. But really, she was still alive. Yeah, just unconscious. She was accidentally buried alive. How terrible is that? And Mary's tombstone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, at high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work in her full strength of body and mind, Mary E. Hart had fallen, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then underneath there's one line that reads, the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away. Alright, that one line's a bit much. Who added that? That's up. Many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, sure, but the tale of her being buried alive suggests that there might be a midnight curse lurking about. Either way, that is a horrible, horrible way to go out. That's probably my worst fear. That's my new worst fear. Number 6, ancient entanglement. All right, once a thriving, beautiful city in ancient Rome, Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 AD. Now, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the ancient city in volcanic ash, and excavation didn't begin until the 18th century, much later. And after a full century of careful excavation, the city was then reopened to the public once again. And now we're at the point where we're uncovering even more art and even more messages from that time. Yeah, messages found on the walls of ancient buildings in Pompeii. There's one exchange that I love personally. It's about two men named Successus and Severus. And here's the message. Let's do this. Successus, a weaver, loves the innkeeper's girl. Her name was Iris. She, however, did not love him. T. Now still he begs her to have pity on him. Now his rival Severus wrote back on, again, said wall. He added to this message and he wrote, "Goodbye, envious one, why do you get in the way? Submit to a handsomer man and one who is being treated very wrongly and good looking. I have spoken. I have written all that there is to say. You love Iris, but she does not love you." Yeah, a lot of drama going on, right? And then Mount Vesuvius randomly erupted and then nobody settled their beef ever. Yeah, this is why you don't waste time in love triangles, okay? Just let her go. Hit that thumbs up and let her go. Mount Vesuvius could go off any day and you're stuck in an entanglement. Get out of here. It's not 79 AD anymore. Number 5, Eugene. 1929, Ohio. A corpse just randomly appeared on the road, just right in the middle of the road. Just 1920s things, I guess. There was an address found on this man's body, but that address led to an empty plot of land. They also had no name for this man as well, so they named him Eugene. They just named him after a local neighbor. That's a pretty odd exchange. Like, hey, we're gonna name this guy after you. No worries, yeah, we just found him. They used this body as an attraction. He was a mummy that people would visit when they swung by in town. Like a museum attraction, only not a pharaoh and a man from the 1920s in Ohio. Little different. Now when people started to ask more about this mummy in Ohio, this random ass mummy, locals all agreed to finally lay the stranger to rest. Underground and not, you know, as an attraction, ideally. So now when you see his grave, it just says Eugene, found dead 1929 and buried 1964. Yeah, I bet so many people see this and they're so confused. They're like, what? Send them this video and be like, hey, you're not gonna believe number 5. Watch this guy. Watch this guy with a beanie explain it. He's much better at it than me. Number 4, Mary Jane McCune. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farage. Now she was born in 1838 and she passed away in 1855. Underneath Mary Jane's name is a message on how she passed. And fair warning, like the others, this is quite grim. It says Mary Jane McCune was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was then smothered with feather bed. Holy shit. Again, imagine just seeing that in the middle of nowhere. It's like, Todd, what the fuck? Barry. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time all this happened, and he only found out what happened as soon as he got back. That's so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because that was the only way, really, to spread it. That was your legacy. It was literally written in stone. Rabies smothered. I'm like, oh my god, can we leave some of this out? This is pretty dark. Number 3, KV 55. This tomb was found in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ayrton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. It was a big deal. But the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than, you know, King Tut's tomb or another name is because we have no idea who it was made for. It's just bare, which is extremely odd for an ancient tomb like this. But as you walk down the 20 steps towards KV 55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance. Markings that show that the entrance was once widened since its first cut, along with its ceiling being raised higher. So again, somebody important was in here. It's just a matter of why they were important, right? What did they do? What happened? A little bit of history. The only hint as to who is buried remains on the walls, and it's in one hieroglyph. And that hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Okay, well, I sure hope not. Whatever happened in there, I've seen the mummy, you know? I'm all set. Let's keep it shut. Number 2, bone compass warning. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves doesn't mean these messages have to be written or carved or drawn per se. Sometimes these messages can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. Yeah, that ought to speak for itself. You see that in the woods, you're on your way. See you later. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground, and judging from the skull, it had been clearly hunted down by humans, right? It was very not normal. Now that's not the mysterious part. The mysterious part here is that all the bones have been carefully separated. There's no marks to suggest that any tools were used at all, so researchers believe that this animal wasn't meant for food. Maybe sacrifice? I don't know, it's odd. Either way, it's pretty dark. The limbs were placed to point north and south directly. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Donkeys in that area in Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre. But the way that these bones were buried, that definitely is. What's the message here, right? What's the point if there is one? If you reach the pile of bones, you've gone too far? What is this? Someone help me out. And finally, number 1, Paris catacombs. We have to end with this massive tomb. It was built in the late 18th century, and the Paris catacombs are massive. The place is literally filled with bones, so of course it needs to have a warning before you enter, right? That's probably fair. That would suck to accidentally stumble upon. You're about to walk into a room full of heads. Yeah, heads up. Since opening day, there's been a message carved above the entrance of the Paris catacombs, and that message translates to stop in the name of love. No, I'm just kidding, it doesn't. It translates to stop, this is the empire of the dead. And at that point, I would go, okay.